All right, everybody, welcome back. We are ready for another deep dive, and I'm super pumped for this one because I love to geek out about language.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be a good one today for sure.
So today, we are tackling a topic that I think pretty much everyone can relate to.
Sure.
Those tricky English language mistakes.
Yeah.
Those little slip-ups.
Yeah.
That can kind of sneak into even the most careful speaker's vocabulary.
Absolutely.
We are taking a deep dive into an episode from the Simple Pod.
Okay.
And get this, the episode is called 10 Common English Mistakes and How to Avoid Them.
Oh, the irony.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's episode 2 if you want to check it out yourself.
I will.
But it's just so funny, like a podcast about language mistakes
Right.
that we're sourcing from another podcast.
Hopefully we don't make any mistakes in our analysis of their mistakes.
Oh, I'm sure I make at least one or two.
But it just goes to show that we all make mistakes, and that's totally part of how we learn.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that Sarah and Jack, the hosts of the Simple Pod, really emphasize in this episode.
Okay, cool.
Is that, it's not about being perfect. It's about recognizing these common errors and using them as opportunities to improve.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting is that they provide a framework for understanding these mistakes.
Yeah.
Not just as isolated errors,
Right.
but as glimpses into the complexities of the English language.
I love that. Yeah.
Which is always evolving and changing.
Exactly. So they start with grammar.
Mm-hmm.
And the example that really resonated with me was the classic I have saw versus I have seen dilemma.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one a lot.
It seems simple.
Right.
It does, but
it trips up so many people. Why is that?
Well, I think it goes beyond just memorizing the correct form.
Right.
It's a window into the quirks of irregular verbs, which often have roots in older forms of English.
Yeah.
And they don't follow that need-ed pattern of regular past participles.
Right, seen.
Just doesn't sound like it should be the past participle of see.
It doesn't follow the rules.
It really doesn't.
It just doesn't.
Our brains just want to apply those regular rules even when they don't fit.
Exactly, and I think that's why so many people make that mistake.
Oh, absolutely. And I've definitely made that mistake myself, and I bet a lot of our listeners have too.
Probably.
So how do we fix it?
So the Simple Pod suggests a really great approach for tackling these kinds of issues with irregular verbs, which is to really break down sentences, identify the verb and then consciously practice choosing the correct form.
Okay, so almost going back to the basics of diagramming sentences.
Exactly. Sometimes getting back to those building blocks can make a big difference.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, the Simple Pod moves on to vocabulary, and they use an example that I always get tripped up on.
Oh, really? Which one?
Borrow versus lend.
Yes, a classic.
Personally, this one always makes me pause for a second.
Well, and I think what's fascinating about this particular confusion is that it's not actually limited to English.
Really?
Yeah, many languages grapple with
Interesting.
how to clearly express the direction of giving and receiving.
Makes sense.
It's really about perspective.
Okay.
Are you the one initiating the action or receiving it?
So how do we keep it straight?
Yeah, well, that's the million-dollar question.
I remember, I heard this tip one time, and it was really helpful.
Oh, tell me.
It was about imagining a library.
Okay.
You borrow books from the library, so borrow means to take.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So when you're trying to figure out which one to use, just picture yourself at the library.
That's a great mnemonic device.
Right.
And it really reinforces that idea of associating words with clear, memorable images.
Yes.
Which is something that the Simple Pod also emphasizes.
They do.
They really stress the importance of immersing yourself in the language, surrounding yourself with books, articles, podcasts, even conversations with native speakers.
Right.
It's all about building those neural pathways and creating those connections in your brain.
So true.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, pronunciation.
All right.
Sarah and Jack bring up this thing about dropping ending sounds.
Okay.
So saying going instead of going.
Yeah.
And it's something that we hear all the time in casual speech.
All the time.
Do you think this is a sign that English is evolving?
It's a really interesting question.
Right.
I think it's certainly a reflection of how spoken language adapts over time.
Yeah.
Think about regional dialects. They often have unique pronunciations and even grammatical structures that differ from what we might consider standard English.
Right.
So this tendency to drop sounds might be a little glimpse into how standard pronunciation could shift.
Wow. That's a really fascinating thought.
Yeah, it's always changing.
But for those of us who want to stick to that current standard pronunciation,
Right.
what does the Simple Pod recommend?
Well, they suggest using things like pronunciation apps and dictionaries as tools.
Okay.
You know, those can be really helpful for breaking words down into like individual sounds and providing feedback on your pronunciation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we get to the often dreaded world of prepositions.
The worst.
Those tiny little words
I don't know.
that can cause some major headaches.
They really can.
The Simple Pod highlights the interested for versus interested in confusion.
Yes.
Like, why are prepositions so hard?
Well, I think it's because prepositions are by nature abstract.
Oh.
Unlike nouns or verbs,
Yeah.
they express relationships and concepts rather than concrete objects or actions.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and that makes them really difficult to translate directly across languages.
Right.
And even harder to like learn as a non-native speaker.
So what do we do?
Well, the Simple Pod had a really good tip for this.
Okay.
They suggested learning prepositions in phrases rather than trying to like memorize individual meanings.
Gotcha.
So for example, instead of just learning the word in,
Yeah.
you would focus on phrases like interested in,
Right.
involved in, or believe in.
Okay.
So it's really about recognizing how prepositions function within those specific contexts.
I like that.
Yeah.
And finally, we come to the spelling and writing errors that I think plague us all.
Oh, yeah, we all make those mistakes.
All the time.
For sure.
The Simple Pod uses the classic there example to illustrate this.
Yeah.
And I have to admit,
Right.
even I still double check those sometimes.
All the time.
I just got to make sure, like, which one is the right one.
I'm constantly second guessing myself.
It's so easy to get them mixed up.
Yeah, I think it's just about being mindful.
Right.
And the Simple Pod really emphasizes the importance of careful proofreading. They even suggest creating a personal cheat sheet of those commonly confused words.
Well, that's a great idea.
You know, just to kind of keep those tricky spellings top of mind.
Yeah, just have it like right there on your desk.
Right, exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
After taking this deep dive into this episode of the Simple Pod,
Yes.
what do you think the like key takeaway is for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that making mistakes is an essential part of learning a language.
Yes, I love that.
It's not about striving for some kind of unattainable perfection,
Right.
but about viewing those oops moments as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. Like embrace those mistakes.
Yeah.
They're going to happen.
Absolutely.
So just, learn from them
Yes.
and keep moving forward.
Keep practicing.
Now, before we wrap up,
Okay.
I have a thought-provoking question for everyone listening.
Oh, I love these.
So if language is constantly evolving, right,
Yes.
as we were talking about with those pronunciation trends, do you think that some of these quote-unquote mistakes
Interesting.
could eventually become accepted as part of like standard English?
It's something to think about for sure.
It really is. And we would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Share your own language adventures, the struggles, the triumphs, all of it.
It's all part of the journey.
Exactly. Keep on learning and exploring this amazing world of language.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on this deep dive.
This was fun.
And we'll catch you next time.
See ya. Bye. Bye.